We went to therapy and I heard that she's got this attachment style. She's avoidant, she's dismissive. What does that what does that mean? Then I Googled avoidant, I Googled dismissive attachment style, and I'm confused. Really what I want is closeness with my wife. I want more intimacy. I want her to care as much as I care. That's what we're talking about here today on the C Note Show with myself, Jeff Allen, and Cynthia Cruz. Here's a man that I've been working with him for about 3 months, and this was his original email to me. And he's since said, my wife is absolutely, definitely avoidant, dismissive, and things have gotten a lot better with him. And we can talk about that today if y'all want to. But here's what he wrote initially to me. My marriage is, let's see, at a crossroads. It's 50-50 whether it will end in divorce. Your description of the pursuer and distancer were a revelation to me as they so accurately define our roles in the relationship. To say I don't want to be a pursuer anymore would be an understatement. We have been married for 32 years and I love my wife, but I want to be in a relationship that is grounded in mutual respect and love. What's the biggest barrier? My inability to recognize how I've taken exactly the wrong approach with my wife. My frustration with not being able to draw her closer. And here's a follow-up email that he sent me about 1 month in. Well, actually, toward the beginning here. So after our first session. Thanks again for the intro session. Looking forward to exploring further. Our session with our therapist yesterday had some pluses and big minus. On the negative side, my wife explained that she's pretty much no sex drive at this point. On the plus side, she said that she really does love me, and I believe her, and agreed on the relevance of the pursuer-distancer behavior pattern for us. The conversation was civil and open. We continued to talk things over after the session. There was some limited sniping back and forth, but we ended at a reasonable spot. She's fully aware of the significance of her lack of interest in sex. I'm chuckling because this is very intellectual, right? In the therapy office, very verbal, very intellectual. The significance of her lack of interest in sex. I explained that if the implication is that she's shutting up shop in that area, then I need to consider my options. At the session, I went through my life goals for the next decade or two. I'm going to live life to the absolute fullest without doubt and fear. I'm going to be with someone that respects me and isn't ashamed to show that they love me, someone that prioritizes our relationship at the highest level. It can be alongside one or two other priorities, but it can never slip down to the point where the relationship is ignored. And someone that enjoys sex and intimacy as much as I do. Of course, the last one stands in stark contrast to where my wife is at. And over the past about 4 months, intimacy is happening again, sex is happening again. There's a lot of great things happening, and resentments coming up from him about things that have been happening in the past, and how she's been dismissive. How
Mm,
they at a party, he'll be the last one that she speaks to.
mm,
She's open and shares with all of her friends, even her emotions, way more than she does with him
yeah.
and childhood stuff and attachment styles. So I'm going to ask you guys about this. How does this resonate with you? Attachment, avoidant, dismissive. But what are you seeing so far, Cynthia? What are you seeing with a man's expectation around intimacy and becoming more of the pursuer, distancer pattern? Let's start there, please.
Yeah, well, the first thing that hits me is for good reasons, maybe no one's at fault, but this to me all comes down to a feeling of who has the power. And I think a feeling of power can make a woman feel safe. And so if she's grown up, maybe not even cognitively recognizing this, but experiencing her sense of power by being the distancer, uh, those two words are going to feel synonymous to her. Uh, Power and safety, power and safety. That's a really hard pattern to shift. It almost reminds me of two tectonic plates on the Earth's surface doing their patterns together. And we obviously, as human beings, can't shift that, except when I see at the bottom of the post and the masculine drive of what he's going to have in his life, to me, that opens up the ability to shift things away from it being about who has the power and into something a lot more intimate with him and his wife or with him and another partner he may choose.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you. So let's talk about this. Unmute yourself. Come on in. What does this mean to you? What does attachment mean to you? What is avoidant, dismissive? What are you hearing already so far today? Let's talk about it. Come on in.
I'm here.
Yeah, Dustin, go for it.
All right. So I'll just use an example that I think I noticed last week. I noticed that my wife was feeling, or she appeared to be pretty distant and cold. And I think in years past, I would try to wiggle my way in and try to find a way to fix that and personalize it too, and think like there was something wrong with me and what I'm doing. Um, And instead, I think I'd listened to one of our coaching calls or one of our KLP sessions about checking in a new way. And instead, I tried something new, and one, told myself it's probably not me.
It's a good start. Yeah.
um, and then I said, hey, I noticed that you're not your normal self right now. I would love to know more about what you're going through. And just tears just came
Oh,
came
wow.
in that moment. She broke down, and she did say like, I'm not in a space to talk about it right now, obviously because the kids were in the back of the car, so that wouldn't be appropriate. But and so the whole drive to LA, it was like a 3 hour drive. I was thinking in my head, don't fix her, don't fix her, don't fix her. It's probably not
Yeah.
it's probably not me. Let her have her space, let her process what she needs to. And then later on, she opened up about her childhood stuff. And so I think her, I'm not speaking on behalf of all women, but for her, when she's in a funk, she will distance herself and kind of create like a shield. And that's her way of processing it. Like she doesn't like to be hugged or touched. That's just her way of doing it. And respecting that boundary is, I'm noticing, something that's been helpful, not forcing myself upon her to try to fix the issue. Um, and so, yeah, there's the avoidant, but there's also a way in too.
Hmm. Is that different than 6 months ago, 2 years ago? All of this
100%,
dynamic? Yeah.
100%. I'd be like, hey, what did I do? Or, hey, like I would almost match her energy, similar to my own childhood stuff, like with my dad. Like if he was on angst, I was on edge. I would match whatever was in the room, rather than being that solid, confident, grounded person where it's like, okay, she needs space to be herself and not have to worry about it affecting me, because then she enters into her masculine if she's worried about her space affecting her surrounding me, right? And so rather than and if your relationship's in that space where like the other is worried about the other's response, they're going to want to physically leave the room and be by themselves. And that's probably where the distancing and the avoidance does come from, is because it's the way we as men are processing their emotion.
Yeah, that's well said. What are we making it mean about us, or what's the story that's going? Cynthia, what are you seeing with his wife's dynamic and not fixing and waiting and her opening later? What are you seeing in their dynamic?
Dustin, I really appreciate uh, you recognizing probably how she's ping-ponged off of you, and if she's taking in how you're responding and matching her energy, how that kind of enforces the I need separation.
Mm,
And what you're sharing today of the more solid you are and the less responsive to whatever storm she's flying out into the air. It's amazing to hear her choose little moments of not separation, but a little door opening and
mm,
sharing. And I bet that feels new and different to her, but also solid and good.
mm,
What do you think?
100%.
What do you think is next for you guys?
Uh, what's next?
Yeah, or what are you looking forward to, or do you have a question about what might be next for the two of you?
Well, my question is I've noticed in our work we sometimes talk about once we get away from the relationship and making that such a huge priority because we've lost ourselves in that relationship and we don't know who we are, what we want, hobbies. I've noticed that as I've turned my back to the relationship, not out of spite, but just out of finding myself, I've noticed her coming back. And there's those moments where, like, we had a counseling session where things came up, and she got confronted by the therapist, and I pushed back too. And I kind of turned my back just because I was in a really vulnerable position to realize, like, oh, there's some shit on her side. And I've noticed as I've turned my back, she's come towards me, but it almost feels like there's this unhealthy dynamic where it's like once I turn, she's coming back. And is that like
Mm.
a valid response? And how do you find that space where it's okay or it's not in a relationship?
Sure. So we're all human, and so we all
Yeah,
have ups and downs, right? Okay. And then the cogs are all affecting each other. How you're doing, how she's doing, your skill, her skill, where the relationship is. So if you turn the cog one way, turn away a bit, it's going to pull on her in a certain way. And there's the
right.
instinct, yeah, there's the instinctual pull of that of, oh, I don't want to be abandoned. My man's turning away from me. Or there's the what we call level three of you need your own time. You're going to go heal your own energy. You're going to center yourself because you don't want to bring your baggage, your shit into the relationship. So there's the levels of it, right? Cynthia, what would you say to his question of the I'm turning my back and she's coming more toward me, but is that a negative thing?
Mm. Yeah, I really appreciate the question because you illuminate so clearly that there's such a hairline between avoidance and anxiously attached. And it's amazing how it's like the magnets that you switch back and forth. If I feel into the depth of your question, there's equilibrium to come to, but right now it's okay that it feels a little quick and switched. And it's okay for her to feel maybe some of her more anxious attachment because that's more real and authentic.
Mm,
I think the healing for a woman occurs when she's put down the shields and the I've got power by pushing away, and she feels the like tremor, the anxiety inside, whether it's evolutionary or social. And but she also feels your solidness on the other side of that. It's not like you as a man or them being like, oh, I have all the power now. It's
right.
she feel the heart-centeredness, the heartwood of you, and you holding the ground for something different.
So what did you hear there? What does that mean for you in particular, Justin?
Um, I think it speaks to like where we're at and let her have the space to decide if she wants to turn towards me or not, and not really judge her process. Because sometimes it feels kind of like, ugh, I don't want it to be this like thing where like she only comes towards me if I don't want to say I'm a jerk. Maybe I assume I'm being a jerk because I'm finally setting some healthy boundaries and it feels a little different and off. And maybe it is a good thing.
Yeah, if we're if we're used to the music either blasting at a 10 or being off at a 0, and when now we're playing music at a 3 or a 4 or a 5, it feels unnerving.
Yeah.
Where whether right, it's
Yeah, it's
like
different.
yeah, it's less roller coaster, more lazy river, I guess. And we
Hmm.
wonder, well, if I'm turning away and she's coming to me with a there's music on at a level 4, but I've turned myself away. I'm not shutting her out. I'm trying to take my own time so we can come back and dance together with this music that's at a 4 instead of blasting or being shut all the way off. It feels different. It's different than the past.
Right.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, good stuff. Good to see you, Dustin.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it. Yeah.
Same.
Yeah, I'd love to talk with other guys. I want to hear what attachment means to you, what dismissive means to you. Paul put in the chat, but isn't it a requirement that the woman, yeah, I'll call on George here in a second. Isn't it a requirement that the woman do her own work to drop the shield How does she get there without acknowledging some hard truths or revealing to herself that there are areas she needs to take responsibility for? That's a great question. Last night I said to a man, what makes this journey in relationship the most difficult is when she's either punishing you or actively shutting down and actively not opening to you, actively moving away on sort of on purpose repeatedly. So what would you say to this question that Paul has, Cynthia?
Yeah, and Paul, when you bring a very aware, perceptive question out, I always think into what you've shared in the past and how long you've been on this journey with your wife. Yeah, it is a requirement that she do her own work. And yeah, she is ultimately the only one who can dare to be courageous to drop her own shields. And are there absolutely soft methods to invite her into that? Yes. And is there medium methods? Yes. And is there more boundary methods to say this is a way I'm going to do relationship? Totally. But ultimately the blame is not on you. And I feel like when a woman can't feel that she can blame you for how she's acting, that's the open door for when she actually starts to take some responsibility for herself.
Yeah, and that begins by us not taking the blame, right? And that's a part of this work. And so, yeah, Paul, what would you say about that piece right there? And then we'll go over to George.
Yeah, it's way beyond that for me, right? Like, um, in other words, I don't think that she's blaming me for much of anything nowadays, other than, we still have, arguments and stuff, but um, it has to do with other things, I suppose. It doesn't have to do with us necessarily. Maybe other topics of the relationship, like extended family or kids and raising kids and stuff like that. Um, and I think that she's aware that, well aware, in fact, there are things that, she could do to improve upon herself, but she just doesn't want to take that next step. Um, and there's some really like basic common things that she tends to do, um, that would indicate to me that she's just kind of, it's like she's having her cake and eating it too. It's a very, oh, woe is me attitude and approach to what she feels is wrong with her life, but she doesn't really do anything about it. And so I've tried, I mean, you talk about all the subtle ways and maybe even more aggressive, if you will, more aggressive ways to try and encourage her, inspire her, lead her to a place that I think would be beneficial for her. And at the same time, maybe somewhat selfishly, hope that it improves our marriage. Um, but as I've said, on other shows, it's just the longer I'm in this marriage, the less faith that I have, and the more that I see myself growing apart from her, where, I've said this before, like I don't have like a clock. It's not like I'm waiting to cross this line of the point of no return, but I do acknowledge that that's in existence somewhere.
Mhm.
And I'm not living the kind of marriage that I want to have with a female. It's just as simple as that. And it's scary as hell
Mm,
because we have so many good things going, and we have kids and all this stuff, but I don't see myself staying in a relationship that like the one I'm in now.
mm,
And so it's hard for me to like, there's no, it's not like I'm giving her an ultimatum, but I do signal in certain ways that, hey, this doesn't really work for me, or, this part of our relationship isn't working. And it's a core issue. Um, like I don't want to be in a relationship that's perpetually going this way in the future. So I don't think it's well received by her
Mhm.
when those sort of things come up. And as gentle as I am when I say it, um, I think she feels threatened. I think she feels dismissed, if I had to guess. But it is my truth. It is my reality, and I can't shy away from that any longer. So, and I haven't for a while.
Mm.
So I always get stuck in this kind of dichotomy where it's like I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop, and I know that's not healthy, but I realize that I'm not really all that happy with the way things are going, and so I get crossed up even still today, as long as I've been doing this and trying to sort through those emotions and sort through those thoughts and try and find the best approach um, to live my values and hope that she's gonna come with me because I know that there's an end at some point, and if things don't change, it's the future does not include her. So
Yeah, that's right. And that's well said. And there's grief, of course, in that. Is will she come along with me? Will she step up? Will she see this in a way other than just closure? There's certainly grief in that. Uh, is there a boots on the ground practical experience or experiment that you're trying right now with her? Do you have a what would be your top priority of what you would want her to do?
she needs to learn how to love herself. She needs to learn how to unconditionally love who she is in this moment, understanding it's not where she wants to be, but then working toward a future that she wants for herself. Okay. And you know, she has extreme body shaming issues.
Mm.
She is overweight, not by a lot, in my opinion, but she, you know, frankly, she could use to drop a few pounds both for her self-image and her health overall. But she doesn't make that a priority in her life.
Mm.
She has opportunities to do that. And, you know, I grew up playing sports my whole, that's all I did as a kid in early college. And, you know, I was a fitness trainer for a short period of time. I appreciate what it means to make time for yourself in that regard. And she's smart. She understands that too, but see, she's not making it a priority. And so that's like one of the biggest examples that I can make. And so I just talked to her. You know, I asked, for example, just the other day, she was like, "Oh, I got to go do this and that, but I want to keep my gym membership, which I'm paying for, whatever, fine, that she hasn't used in months." And I said, "Well, instead of doing A, B, and C that you just mentioned, why not use that time to go to the gym? Like, go drop our daughter off at dance, and instead of doing these other things, which aren't a priority in my opinion, I said, go to the gym, do something for yourself, go work out. It'll make you feel better." She didn't do it. She went and did ABC instead, which didn't freaking matter. She could have done that 2 weeks from now. So that's what I mean. It's hard to wrap my head around, especially as a guy, where it's like, I'm just going to go do this,
Mm.
right? And she just can't seem to. So to answer your question, you know, I try to inspire her by making suggestions to her about ways that she could make improvements based on what she's telling me. So it's a response to what's going on with her. Um, and that's where the rub is because it's frustrating as hell to hear that, to try and lead her, to try and help her. And it's just like she just disregards it, both with regard to me and even with herself. So
Yeah, it's difficult to love and be attracted to someone and care for someone when they don't love and care for themselves. And the the desire of relationship slips as they feel like more and more of a petulant child or an 18-year-old that I mean my son's 20 and I deal with this all the time with it, that okay, how are you going to function in the world if you sabotage yourself if you don't take these simple actions that I'm suggesting that you do, and they fight against it. And it seems like the sabotage becomes larger and larger, and we have less and less desire for the vibe of this person who isn't taking care of themselves. And from that point, what are you seeing? What are you seeing in not just in what she could do or should do, which we've talked
Mhm.
about and Paul's aware, but where is the idea? Where's the line of well, I'm going to let her be who she is.
Mhm.
And she's either going to want to better herself at this point or not.
Mhm.
And I'm going to let that go. And I'm going to stop suggesting and I'm going to stop trying to help. And I'm just going to let her do what she's going to do. And I'll work on myself. And either the relationship ends up dying or not. An acceptance of what's going to happen with the relationship, but an allowance. Where do you see that in the dynamic of marriage and relationship?
Yeah, and gosh, Paul, I so appreciate how you've created over time, and I've heard this in numerous accounts and in numerous ways, little pathways. Like, here's a pathway for you to follow. Um, I guess the first thing I'll say, which I am sure is because you said she needs to love herself. So, what in this exact moment, what does she have to face if she's going to go do these errands where she actually feels accomplished and like doesn't have to feel deeper feelings? That's more of a dopamine hit versus going to the gym where she has to evolve herself past this mountain of self-hate or see herself in the mirror, compare herself to others. So I understand in her point of view that it's complicated, but where does the line draw? You know, addressing the feminine, hey, you know, addressing the monster in the room of why are you self-sabotaging yourself? What's so hard about the gym? What feels so hard about the gym? Uh, Addressing her monsters is a really good thing. And if she just refuses time and time again that being the victim is better, it gives her more. She's got her cake and eat it too. Having almost a definite line of you either step across this into this new continent with me or we shift this uh, is sometimes the only energy that can combat and really heroically lead that victim mentality.
I mean, we have seen that many, many times when the man with an open heart and love decides that this isn't working and it's almost, it feels like a giving up on her energy. And whether you file divorce or don't file divorce, it really starts within you. Okay, if I've given up on her, then there isn't going to be subtle expressions of still hoping and trying, which sounds really bad. But if you have been skillfully doing everything you can to help a person, like my 20-year-old son right now, I was going to help him get car repairs. He hasn't had as much work recently. I see the leading indicators for life. You know, one bump in the road and his shit's gonna hit the fan. His girlfriend's not gonna like a broke ass dude who isn't working enough, you know? And so at this point, it's all right. And I can't save him. And that's where I really am with him at this moment. He's done great. He's doing a lot of great things. And right this moment, he's complacent and feels like he's taking advantage of my, safety net, let's say. So the world's going to smack him in the face sooner or later. And it's, well, what do I think is overall best for him? I need to be his father, not his friend. And that's where I want to be that my woman's lover. I want us to be lovers together. But all these other things are in the way, all the sabotage, all this past. It's all
Safety
fair.
net and complacency. Those are the
Yeah.
two words or phrases. It
Yeah.
just it hits the nail on the head.
Yeah. And with kids, obviously, it's so complicated and heart-wrenching. And a lot of times when the man, through work, after many months or a couple of years of his own work and coming to these and doing this work, finally, when he gives up, again, whether he files or not, but once he lets go, really drops the rope and it's a grieving, that's sometimes, is that what you're saying? That's sometimes the only thing that'll shift the tectonic plates.
Yeah, and I actually, in saying that or hearing that, I feel grief for my own coming up and like through my body for her that she's buried herself in this hole. But man, as a woman, if you're not willing to climb out of the hole, you're going, what's going to inspire you to climb out? Oh, well, someone's filling in the hole. I better climb out. Or the rainwater's coming in. I gotta move. To me, that's the biggest gift for her, whether that inspires her into relationship or just out of her own hole in general.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Paul. Good to see you. Absolutely great question. George, please.
Yeah, thanks. I don't know that I have a whole lot to add to this except to make the observation that, Dustin's points about maintaining stability, not getting caught up in the emotional storm, and also the turning away. I kind of look at that as kind of my own past and coming into the current where I mean, if my wife was not avoidant, I don't, it's a textbook case, right? I mean, I learned a lot about this by reading Secure Love by Julia Manano. And then Dustin's comment about, what does the future hold? That's kind of where I am now. So, I mean, I can only share my own experience, which is now I am in my now resolving, thankfully, third in-home separation, which got as far as complete steps and threats toward divorce, where we were actually meeting with a financial mediator on December 16th, and there was silence. And I kind of faced that fear and I said, look, we can do this. I'm happy with, I'm fine if we go to divorce and we can come up with a solution. I did all of that. And then, like, almost predictably, it's becoming really kind of scary now. There was a 180-degree turn, and this is the second time I've experienced this where I kind of face that fear head on and say, yeah, I'm okay with it. And then there's this sudden flip. And we've gotten to the point now where, we had a heartfelt discussion about this. And, she said she doesn't want a divorce. And she gave me the reasons why, because despite all the terrible stuff, which again, there's very little self-awareness or introspection about her role, which I don't expect anymore. It's you either love the person the way they are and you work with it, and then you get to the point of deciding for yourself when is enough isn't enough. But I guess if I had a question, it's kind of similar to Dustin's, is what does the future hold? I don't think mentally, psychologically, despite doing all this work and getting stable in myself, I'm only a human, right? So at some point, when you're convinced that you're as stable as possible, you're working on yourself, you've got other interests, you've checked all those boxes, and it's sincere.
Mm.
If something else wells up inside and the immediate tool to go to is, oh, I need space or something else is going on in my life, and if I can't end up being the bucket for all of this around which I'm the target to say, well, I need separation for you and we need to think about divorce. We can't keep having this yo-yo. I mean, I can set boundaries on that. I mean, talks or threats about divorce or actions, that's not a go-to tool around which you stimulate a discussion. So
Right. That's a great question. And this is something that you and I are going to continue, of course, to get into one-on-one. But for now, the boundary, as Cynthia was inferring earlier, it feels like sticking a stick in the spokes, where you're going to stop the bike, you're going to stop the wheel, but it's in the most kind of aggressive, uncaring, seemingly way.
yeah.
Or what was written in the chat, dismissive avoidance tend to be hypersensitive to anything perceived as criticism or any attempts to change her, right? Very frustrating. So that's why boundaries are a fancy big word, but what do we do in practice is a bit of what you're asking. When we're solid and centered as best we can in the humans that we are through this work, as you were saying, George, then we can begin to calmly, patiently teach her, invite her into a different type of relationship, into type 3, like we talk about. For instance, let's say that cooking is an example that I think about, right? So let's say, or budgeting money. We've talked with many men about this. So let's say cooking. Let's say she's not very good at cooking. And if I get upset and lash out and I'm angry and shame and punish, obviously that's not good. It's like, well, yeah, what an asshole. But if I lovingly say, hey, let me teach you how to do this, or hey, let's not, like like I see something that's going on, let me teach you. Now she may perceive it as criticism and get frustrated and angry. And if I don't really care, if I'm okay that she takes that a little bit the wrong way or she gets flustered or upset, and that's fine, but I'm leading her into a new way of cooking, a new way of intimacy, a new way of sex, a new way of relating to one another, where the music is at a 3 or a 4, as I was saying earlier. And if she goes to a 10, we invite her to bring it back down to a 3, or we do go take some alone time. And where if she turns off to a 0, that we do have the skill of how and when to approach her to try to bring things back to a 3 or a 4. That's the metaphoric perspective of your question, George. What would you add? What would you add to that? Okay, he doesn't just want to be threatened with divorce or her complete shutdown again in the future, so that's got to change in some way. What would you say about that?
Yeah, I think what you said, George, you already said the wisdom of it. You're like, I'm grounded enough. I know myself enough. I know where this boundary's coming from. And it reminds me of at the beginning of the call where it's the pursuer, dynamic. I think the the one who is the pursuer or the one who's dealing with the avoidant person tends to think, oh, if I'm just 100% perfect, then I can say something. Or uh, if the masculine is experiencing this emotional storm from women, like I have to be perfectly grounded, nothing can ever throw me off before my boundary will really stick or this will really feel good. And I guess I call out that, like what you said, George, the humanness is allowed. And feeling like the spoke got stuck and it's flipping over forward onto the ground, that's okay too. That still matters and makes a difference. And just like you are allowing her to be human in life, this whole dynamic is absolutely a human dance.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, George. We'll talk more. We're almost out of time for today, so it's a great question. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Nice to see you. Well, let's move toward some points and wrap up. When I search Google, avoidant dismissive attachment refers to a pattern in relationships where a person strongly avoids emotional intimacy and closeness, prioritizing independence and self-sufficiency to the point of appearing emotionally detached, often downplaying the importance of relationships and pushing partners away when intimacy is sought, right? Extreme independence, emotional detachment, discomfort with vulnerability, minimal emotional needs or seeming minimal emotional needs, wanting in relationship, dismissive, maintaining distance. Childhood experiences often lead to this, right? Defense mechanisms, avoiding emotional pain by pushing away, right? And according to Google, how to manage this? Well, working with a therapist to understand the root cause of the attachment style. So, do we know where our story comes from? Do we know how, as a child, we were taught love? When we cried, when we needed something as a baby, as a child, how were we responded to? Were we ignored? Were we shamed? Were we connected with? How to manage self-awareness, gradual exposure to intimacy, communication skills. And of course, again, she has to want this, and how to help her want this, how to help you be grounded and solid within this is what we teach, is what we talk about, is what we're talking about today, is what we talk about in all of our calls, right? So, Cynthia, what would you say are a takeaway? What's a takeaway for you today of this topic, avoidant dismissive, and what we've talked about today?
Yeah, I think what hits me the most is uh, I'll let's say you're dating a woman, you're not going to see these core patterns in her, and she's probably not even cognizant of these core patterns in her until it plays out into the landscape of relationship because this is so subconscious to her. So the fact that you in your masculine energy is willing to stand solid and witness these patterns and choose the direction you're willing to take with that, with the groundedness, with the work, with the heart centeredness. That is the biggest gift you can give anyone as they're unfolding their attachment style. The fact that she gets to be in this landscape with you is the gift. And man, do I hope that she gets to figure that out. And if she doesn't, man, am I glad that the world, that your children, that anyone you have interactions with gets to have you in it.
Absolutely. And you're here as a man for the growth, for the journey. And I appreciate that about you. Awesome. Thanks, Cynthia. See you guys next time. Have a good one. Ciao, guys.
Thank you.